Excellency, let me give you the floor to you as the first panelist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hello? Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Mr. Boskir. Your introduction covered all aspects of this phenomenon of our times that came to stay. First of all, answering directly to your question, evidence must replace fear. Facts must defeat myths. Why do I say that? Because this is the outcome of my experience. As you all know, when I was designated commissioner in the year 2014, I was taken by surprise to see that my portfolio would become very soon the most important in Europe and one of the most important in the world, because at that time we had the very first uncontrolled migratory flows in Europe. They were all crossing mostly Greece and other countries of Southern Europe. And the other hand, the very first terrorist attacks, because my portfolio was covering both migration and internal homeland security. So Jean-Claude Juncker told me, Dimitri, you are the lucky man. You have to cope with that issue, starting building from scratch the European agenda on migration and security. Believe me, it was not an easy task to cope with, especially with Europe, where everyone, we love Europe, I'm convinced European, and some others here, but Europe, unfortunately, did not manage to complete the European project and start thinking in a more European way, basing our response to all these challenges on solidarity and responsibility. I repeatedly say that solidarity and responsibility are not just nice words. They are enshrined 17 times on the founding text of the treaty. So when the moment came for Europe to be confronted with this crisis, unfortunately, some of the governments, I don't say member states, they had started following their own national line by looking inwards. In other words, what the domestic audience wants. And if you go there, then populism is coming, and the answers are very, very clear. I give you an example. The Prime Minister of Hungary conducted a referendum, and he came back to Brussels, Mr. Orban, and said, look, I cannot go beyond what my people say. And what was the question of this referendum? He asked the people, do you want to be you that will decide who is coming to Europe or Brussels? What would be the answer? 95% they said you. So he came with a weapon in his hands against our common stance to manage migration. So Europe was taken by surprise. They didn't know how to do, and we had to start building, as I said, from scratch, the European agenda on migration. And then the problems appeared. First of all, it was very important to start cooperating with not only the countries of transit, but also the countries of origin. I have traveled all around northern Africa and the region of Sub-Sahel. Believe me, it was difficult to find common ground with their governments. And I have to be frank, some of these governments were not even recognizing their citizens. They said, how do you know that they are ours? It was a confusing situation. And on the top of that, we had the expansion and the development of the smugglers network. They exploit all these people who are determined to find a better life, and nothing will stop them from crossing firewalls, rough seas, in order to reach to their destination. So, difficult to cooperate. And then we said, what's the global community is doing for that? I remember I met in Geneva the former Secretary General of the United Nations, and I suggested him to convene in New York an extraordinary General Assembly of all leaders around the world in order to discuss migration. It was a fantastic meeting. The best words were heard there. Rhetorics that were reminding us that we have to work with humanity and dignity. And then, nothing. They all went back to their homeland, to their countries, and they had to cope with domestic issues. Confronted, as I said before, with all these populist movements, xenophobia, racism came back on the top. we started building relations with other stakeholders. And I have to tell you that I fully agree with what Mr. Bozkir said before, because I negotiated the EU-Turkey statement. It was not an agreement, that was the idea, because if there were an agreement between the European Union and Turkey, it would take at least 1 century for all parliaments to ratify such an agreement. So we said, let's have a gentleman's agreement. And it was mutually respected. The condition was Turkey to be supported financially from the European Union in order to maintain their 3.5 million refugees. Now they are about 5 million. And on the other hand, Turkey to stem the flows, and it worked. We had an excellent cooperation with stable and stabilizing countries in Northern Africa. For instance, with Egypt, the cooperation was perfect. Egypt took part of its responsibility, but it was not the same with Libya. Libya, I'm sorry to say, is still a failed state. So it's an open corridor for the ones who want to come from Southern or from Central Africa to Europe. How can you stop it? And now we are confronted with a new challenge. Yesterday, we discussed a bit about Sudan. We all know what's happening in Sudan right now. More than 150,000 people were killed during the last days. And where is the international community? Yes, they say that we have to tell them to stop the war. It is not as easy as it sounds. But if it continues like this, we are going to have at least 1 million Sudanese fleeing towards somewhere. And most of them, they want to come, of course, to Europe, crossing Egypt, or Libya as a result that it is much easier. So I come to the very first conclusion. First of all, regarding the basic issue of migration. How can you treat these people? Well, first of all, with dignity. It's very important to understand that they are human beings. The second is that we have to respect the basic principles upon which the world order is built. And the United Nations is very clear on that. But the problem is that the United Nations is very weak now. They cannot intervene. They cannot impose their will because most of the countries are fragmented within their soil. So we have to continue in building a global architecture, a global strategy on managing migration. The moment we are here and we discuss this issue today, it's good to know that more than 200 million people are around the world, are on the move. They want to go somewhere, and the international community is not prepared for that. This is directly connected to other problems like domestic security, internal security. I referred to smugglers before. And now, a last remark. The perception, especially in Europe, is that migration is directly linked to terrorism. No, it is not true. Most of the perpetrators of the terrorist acts in Europe were homegrown people. And the question is, why were not they integrated? I'll share with you my own experience when I was mayor of Athens, and I'm happy that I'm surrounded by mayors because they are the ones that are feeling every day the consequences of migration and mostly of illegal migration. At that time, we had also uncontrolled flows in Greece from Albania. You know what I did as mayor of Athens? Instead of fostering xenophobia, I adopted a policy that integrated them. Now, today, 25 years after, I would say that they're as good as the Greek citizens. So integration in Europe has failed. From the moment some countries opened their doors for all these people to come here, they should have taken care of them and of their children. So this phenomenon could have been controlled. And now I come to the local governments. What we say today has to do with how local communities are addressing this issue. And mayors here, they can share their own experience. They are not helped by governments, neither by international organizations. But this is the very first point of reference for the ones who want to come to another country. So the reality is that we are still lagging behind in adopting a common agenda on a global scale, because this phenomenon is global. You see what's happening in Myanmar. You see what's happening in South America. You see how the migrants are treated in the United States. So are we going to live with that or to keep it aside? Because if we keep it aside and we ignore the consequence of migration, we shall be confronted with huge difficulties in the future. So I come to the last conclusion. It is a question of the global community of the international community to address this issue and face these people with dignity and solidarity among us. This is the question, and I'm afraid that the answer is not given yet. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Excellency. I think you're one of the experts in the world who has really faced the situation, found solutions, also convinced both sides of the picture, and came out alive and successful. I mean, it's not an easy task to do. Thank you very much.
We shouldn't ignore the economic dimension. I have to say that in Europe, for instance, Europe, as you know, is an aging continent. More and more, Europe will be in need of migrants. The solution there, and the answer is very clear, only by opening legal pathways. And this was my contribution. And for the very first time, the European Union has somehow appointed migration attachés in their delegations around the world. But it is not as simple as it sounds, because there is a collision between national migration policy and the European migration policy. And that's where a solution should be found. Thank you.
Happy to hear your last words.
My last words in life? Well,
another 100 years, Dimitri.
At least. Well, I've been following migration for the last 10 years. Believe me, attending all these events, I come to the conclusion that nothing has changed. The same words, the same wishes, but nothing in order to provide this phenomenon with solution and an exit from the impasse where we are today. We know what are the root causes of migration, of illegal migration as it is called. Wars, persecution, climate change, ethnic and religious rivalries, dictatorships. How can you stop it there? This is the responsibility of the global community. And I'm afraid nothing substantial has happened so far. Migration, in the way it happened in our life, has given food, has fueled within the domestic and national communities and countries populism. On the top of that, we have nationalism. As I said in the beginning, xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia. We cannot go on like this. And now we come to one of the core issues of our meeting today. What is the role of cities? I understand better than anybody else how do mayors and local communities and governments feel. I heard our colleagues before. I can tell them that alone they can do nothing. It has to do with how national governments and the international community is coping with the issue, to provide them with the tools, but with very specific guidelines. Because what are the cities? The cities are the laboratories of this exercise to manage migration on the ground, and of course, laboratories of integration. As I said before, unfortunately, it cannot happen today under the current circumstances. I believe that what Mr. Moratinos decided to do, to engage cities in this alliance of civilization is very, very important. Mayors have to see their voice being heard. So far, it doesn't happen. The decision and the debate is at the highest level, so there's a distance between international community, national governments, and local governments. We have all to work together in order to find a solution. Otherwise, in 10 days from now, we are going to say the same things. But on the other hand, there's a big part of our global population suffering. And we have to address this issue with humanity and dignity in order to strike a balance between a more efficient and effective borders management, to see who are the ones who are entitled of international protection according to international law. I'm talking about refugees, because there's a difference between a refugee and a migrant. This has to become more clear. On the other hand, to adopt, through international conventions and meetings, a common agenda of how to cope with migration. These people are suffering. And believe me, I have spoken direct to them. I have visited Lampedusa, I have visited Mali, I have visited everybody. Nothing will stop them from crossing illegally or legally borders. Nothing will stop them from seeking a better life. And of course, the destination, as was correctly said before, cannot be but Europe, at least for the moment. But was Europe prepared? I said before, no, Europe was taken by surprise. Europe didn't know how to handle this issue. And believe me, since I'm following this issue, the last pact that was adopted in Brussels, for me, I have to be blunt, it is a failure, because it brings us back to the year 2015. There is fear, there's perceptions and superstitions, and as I said before, more and more the populist power are gaining ground, and there are obstacles in order to adopt a common agenda and policy on managing migration. I'm not pessimistic. I believe the solution comes on its own in history, as it has happened many times in the past. But this phenomenon came to stay, and 10 years is a long period. So we have to take our responsibilities, and I believe this dialogue, and by engaging cities, I believe Mr. Moratinas has some other good ideas of how to do more at the level of mayors. Maybe in the next meeting of the Alliance of Civilizations, we can have more mayors to exchange their views with us. So yes, let's work on that. This is a very useful debate today. We shared some good paradigms at local, regional, national, international level, but the conclusions are yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much.